The presentation that I'm going to do today is about understanding the role of the Federal Society. So it's understanding the role of the Federal Society. So who are the Federal Society? Today we're going to talk about who the Federal Society are and what role they are playing in the political field of the United States. We will look at how the Federal Society grew from a small student organization into a dominant force in law and politics. The 5 substantive areas of law that they looked at were the Constitution, government, individual rights that were adopted, created, and proliferated by the Federal Society, and in turn, how their legal ideas contributed to the creation of law and policy. So does anybody have any questions about that first slide? If not, we'll move on.
I'm not sure if you'll mention it, Debs. I think it was David McIntosh who was the co-founder, and we know Leonard Leo had a lot to do with it, and they were basically set up in a lot of the major universities like Harvard for the lawyers. That's
right. I'm going to go into that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when you say small student organisation, I suppose it was started at universities, was it? So that's why.
Yes. Yeah. We'll go into that. So the significance of this study. So the consequences of decades of the Federal Society's legal activism. So what is legal activism? So legal activism is a direct, vigorous action, especially in support of opposition to a side of a controversy issue. Okay, so that's legal activism. So the consequences of decades of the Federalist Society's legal activism are becoming more apparent and more widespread. The Society's legal activism is ongoing, leaving many areas of settled law susceptible to upheaval. So what's the settled law? So the settled law is the laws that have been put in place, and susceptible, of course, is being opened to be influenced or harmed. Okay, so the Society's legal activism is ongoing, leaving many areas of settled law susceptible to upheaval, with unknown consequences and implications for everyone. Implications mean settled law is once a court has settled a particular question of law, it has established a precedent. So that's the settled law. So Supreme Court decisions extend beyond the individual litigants in a particular case. These decisions set principles that carry over to subsequent legal matters. They guide lower court rulings and shape the rules we live under. Supreme Court decisions affect people's lives in ways we understand and in ways we may not. Additionally, Supreme Court decisions have distinct impacts on different segments of the population. Therefore, the ability of an ideological organization such as the Federal Society to insert principles into Supreme Court decisions has widespread repercussions for a society based on democratic rule. So when we think about Democrats and Republicans, we know this particular Federal Society is conservative, so they lean onto the right. Even though we see in there that they are able to change laws or policies. So when we think of what the role of Congress are, and you've got the Congress, you've got the House of Representatives, and then you've got the Senate. We know today that Republicans have got the House of Representatives, but they don't have the Senate. I think it's a 51-49 majority. And so Democrats hold the majority at the moment. However, if they didn't, and it was a 50-50 split, then in the current Congress, during a power sharing argument, gives Republicans considerable leverage over Democratic votes, despite being in the minority. So yeah. So when we think about it, so what's supposed to happen is when they do these laws, because at the moment they're going ahead and writing these laws. So when we think of the legislative branch, we think of the judicial and we think of the executive. The legislative branch makes the laws. Okay, so the House of Representatives and Senate is tasked with writing the statutes. We've got the judicial, which is enforced with interpreting these laws. They don't write them. It's appointed by the executive branch and confirmed by the legislative branch. And of course, the executive branch is not tasked with writing these laws, but instead they implement them and they enforce them. In other words, carry them out in the land.
So Debbie,
yes.
When you said, yeah, it's Curtis.
Yeah.
When you said the Federalist Society make laws, what did you mean by that?
They're changing the policies that are in there at the moment. They're not liking them. So what they want to do is they want to change policies and laws the way that it'll fit the way that they want it to be. And I mean, you can look at I don't really want to go too deep because it's going to explain it in the rest of the slides. But basically, we can look at Roe versus Wade. What happened there when that law was already settled, wasn't it? So how was it that they were able to override that? It's things like that they're doing. But we're going to go into more. Yeah, sorry. We will go into more detail about it, and it will make it more clearer.
Debbie?
Yes. Who's that? Sorry.
It's Nat. I just wanted to clarify, because the Federal Society are separate from the justices, but what they do is they educate the lawyers for the past 30 years.
All that is study.
To make sure that those that were put on the judiciary are the ones who have the same thinking of how the originalists, like Clarence Thomas and Alito, they're the Federal Society is separate from the judicial.
Yes, I know.
But they are the ones that train up the lawyers and the justices from the very beginning. So there's a difference of, they don't make any laws, they train up the judiciary, the justices, and they interpret the Constitution in an originalist manner. Thank you.
Yes, okay, but they do make, it says in here, they do make laws. They have been able to do that. They
don't make laws. They're just a society. They didn't make the Constitution or anything like that.
I'm not saying that they did. I'm not saying that they make the law, but they have been able to change it and make different policies and change it around.
I thought that's what you said, actually.
Yes, exactly.
They were able to interpret law, and I think that's the thing. And that interpretation of law is very important because it does change the law. But it's just that they wrote the law. I think it's a subtle difference. Maybe that'll come out as we go.
It will do, yeah, it will do. Thank you for that term, Natalie. Does anybody else have any questions on this particular slide? If not, we'll move swiftly on. So one of the ways the Federal Society has been able to influence the shape and trajectory of the laws that guide our lives is through the top court in the nation. Okay, so the Federal Society has successfully inserted its principles of law into Supreme Court decisions. This has resulted in a halting of the rights revolution and limiting the power of the federal government to remedy society's failures, and in particular, those failures that impact certain segments of society. The Federal Society's control over Republican presidents' judicial nominees places power in the hands of one organization comprised of social and economic elites based on an agreed conservative viewpoint, concentrated in one political party and an aligned majority on the Supreme Court. So it talks about the top court of the nation. What's the top court of the nation? The Supreme Court. It shapes and it says it's able to influence the shape and trajectory. What is trajectory? Progression, line of development. Okay. Rights revolution. When it talks about the rights revolution, halting of the rights revolution, the rights revolution is a commitment by the national government to promote a healthful environment, safe products, freedom from discrimination, and other rights.
Deb. Oh. Go
Yes.
on, Peter.
Hello, I can't hear you, Natalie.
I was going to let Curtis go, but I'll go. I was just going to say that. I was just going to say that it was Leonard Leo, or whatever we're tracing.
Leonard Leo. Yeah.
It was him that was in alliance with Trump who put forth the list for the judiciary, the judges, and that's where.
Yes. No, I know. All that's going to be in the thing in the what's the name? I know all that. Yeah, thank you. And Curtis, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was a question. Where it says the Federalist Society has successfully inserted its principles of law into Supreme Court decisions.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to touch on this. If you are, then you don't need to answer. How does it go about inserting its principles of law?
Right, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, that's fine.
So it'll go in, don't worry. But I was going to say, I've done about 50 slides on this, and I'm just going to go through this very slowly, okay? But we're not only going to see how it does it, but we're going to find out what those principles are, okay? So it does outline it, all right? And so, yeah, so it's understanding the relationship between courts and social change. Right, okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. If anybody doesn't have any questions on this slide, we'll move on to the next one. So this would appear to contradict the very concentration of power conservatives claim to fear. It certainly diminishes the advice and consent role of the Senate in confirming nominees. It also indicates that the Federal Society may not truly believe that judges in practice merely say what the law is, not what it should be. So what is advice and consent? So advice and consent, this is a constitutionally mandated power of the Senate. Presidents must consult with the Senate and seek their approval for the ratification of treaties and executive appointments, including ambassadors, judges, and cabinet posts. This power is derived from the Constitution, wherein Article 2, Section 2 states that with the advice and consent of the Senate, this power forms one of the vital checks and balances that the Senate has over the executive branch of the federal government. Okay, does anybody have any questions about this slide?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand what you said about that. It seems important. Please could you re-explain that? Or explain it just in how you understand it.
It means that when they're doing nominees, or when they have the role of the Senate is to confirm nominees. So when we think about what the Federal Society are up to, where behind the scenes, they're what's coming to mind to me is that what they've been doing behind the scenes, which hasn't come up yet, but what they've been doing is nominating their own people, their own judges that they want to put in place. So they haven't been particularly following this advice and consent sort of mandate that should be taken place. So, and this is going to come out because when we look back into how the Federal Society have nominated or got the people in to be judges, we can see that there's 6 judges that are in the executive at the moment. And those particular ones most of them are members of this Federal Society. And you cannot be voted into a position unless you are a member of the Federal Society. So these people, what they've done, it's almost like they've overridden this particular practice that should be in place. And they, even though it's not just nominating people and putting them in place, it still has to be nominated. People still have to go ahead and nominate these people. But most of the people from the Federal Society, they're in the court, they're in the government. most of the people that are in the government are from and members of the Federal Society. So, sorry, go on.
I don't know. That seems okay to me when you describe it that way, that this society comes with a list of people that they feel should be, on the Supreme Court. Then they go to the Senate to say, these are the people we want in because we think they would be good for the job. And the Senate still have to vote those people in or not. So
yes,
ultimately the decision.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but it's still underhanded because they're bringing their own people in. It's not. It's that anybody who goes for these particular government jobs, they're not bringing them in because they have to be members of the Federal Society. It's not giving other people a fair advantage. So when I go into the study, there's one person that was was going to be voted in. It was actually a lady, and it was when Obama was the president, and I think he wanted a lady, I can't remember the lady's name, to come into the government, his government, and they didn't vote her in. And I wanted to know why she wasn't voted in. Was it just simply because she was a woman? And the reason why I found out was because she wasn't a member of this Federal Society. So to me, that's not giving people a fair advantage.
So the Senate didn't vote her in, which seems like that's what democracy is. Or I don't know, it just seems like that's the system of checks and balances that they created is doing its job, that the president wanted someone in and Senate said, but it's our job to confirm people, so we're not going to vote. So
yes, but don't you see that underhandedness that they're doing? They're making sure they're getting their own people in. This is what the Federal Society are doing.
More people in Senate.
No, they're getting their own people in.
Yeah, I'm saying so the people who want our people in should get more people in Senate to vote those people in.
Yeah, but they're not following this particular advice and consent thing. That's what I'm saying. There's a president set there, but they're not doing that. They're overriding that and getting their own people in.
But it's not the president's job.
No. I'm not saying it is the president's job. I'm saying the Federal Society behind the scenes are doing this. They're the ones who are placing them in front of the president and saying, this is who we want in.
Can I interject a bit?
Go on, sorry, go on.
I think what Debbie's trying to say is, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Johnson Amendment goes against this. What the Federal Societies do, Leonard Leo, he is great at raising money, and he has 3 companies where millions of pounds go in, and that money, I think it was 14 million for I forget, Courgette Neil, is it? Was spent just on him, on advertising, just to get him in to be voted in to be part of the judiciary. So I think the thing that's a bit not correct in the way that they're supposed to go through this in a democratic way is that the Federal Society spend millions and millions of pounds, and you could say, well, so do the Democrats to try and get their Senate, their judges in, but they go about it in ways that are not really correct. And I think that's the issue.
I don't know. I'm struggling to, maybe I'm just not comprehending. I'm struggling to see from what's been said. I'm struggling to see how they're going about it in a bad way. Like, let's just replace Federalist Society with Radical Feminist Society, and Radical Feminist Society did all these things. We'd be like, hooray, clap hands.
Yeah, I think the question here is about this point, I suppose. So Natalie's making a separate point about money and stuff and them doing stuff that's not good. But at this point, Debbie is saying, what are you saying about how they're diminishing that advice and consent role? So the Senate has a role to advise and consent about these nominations. So anyone can nominate anyone. So that's not wrong to come as a Federalist Society and nominate your person. I think that's Kirsty's point. A radical feminist could come along and say, we want to nominate this person because they're a radical feminist. Now, what happens is it goes before the Senate, and the Senate advise and consent. What does that look like? They vote on it, and if they vote, then surely that's still democratic. So what's the bit that's not good about this, I suppose?
I'm trying to say that they're sort of taking over almost. They're making sure that their people are in, that all the people, they've even got their judges in. Do you know what I mean? And this is what I say, this is unfair about the whole thing.
Yeah, but how's that unfair?
Yeah, I see all that, and I think that links to Natalie's point. But how are they influencing this advice and consent role of the Senate? So on this particular point, are they actually going against law in a sense because if the Senate then votes, say, you know, I don't know, it's a 50-50, it's a 75-25 split, the Senate still voted on that nominee, regardless of how they got that nominee there. Is either they've influenced the Senate negatively in some way, so they're paying people or something in the Senate. I don't know, but what are they doing?
They are doing that behind the scenes.
So there's kind of bribery and extortion on the members of the Senate who are, because all the Senate are voted in democratically by the states, aren't they? So, well, you could argue some of that, but in generally speaking, those people haven't been placed there by the Federalist Society. The Senate hasn't. So they are now being influenced, you're saying, by like bribery and extortion in the background to vote for that particular person. Is that what's happening?
Yes, it is. That's what's
become clear.
Make that very clear.
And as Natalie said, like we say bribery and corruption, they have a sanitized word for it called lobbying, which, as Natalie said, the Democrats do just as much. Okay. Anyway, we can move on.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else want to say anything? If not, we'll move on. Okay, this study is going to cover the Federalist Society is a conservative law movement which was founded in April 1982 by law students who were conservative because they believed the courts, law schools and government were dominated by liberal bias, and they wanted to counteract that. So what is this liberal bias that they want to fight against, so, or that they feel that's dominated by? So someone who's liberal, so someone who has a liberal views, believes people should have a lot of freedom deciding how to behave and think, and they basically tilt towards the left. Political conservatism are resistant to change. They want to preserve existing conditions and institutions, or to restore traditional ones and to limit change, basically. Right, to limit change. They also have traditional family values and the sanctity of marriage. They support a small, non-invasive government and a strong national defence focused on protection and the fight against terrorism. And they have a commitment to faith and religion and the right to life for every human being. So that's what they are. Oops. So the Federalist Society has a network of lawyers, think tanks, and legal institutions, and have appointed Federalist Society members to influential positions in government. In this study, we're going to look at how some 40 years later, how there have been a rightward turn in the Supreme Court, which scholars have attributed in part to the efforts of the Federalist Society. We're going to look at the Constitution interpretation and the impact of the Federalist Society on law. We're going to look at how the Society spreads ideas to influence policy. We're also going to look at methodology they chose to interpret the Constitution. Does anybody have any questions on that? So what effect does the Federalist Society have on constitutional law? The Federalist Society has shifted American law in a conservative direction over the past 4 decades, where a transformation has taken place. The Federalist Society is the hub of a network that reaches all levels of the legal community, providing them many access points to spread conservative and libertarian constitutional principles into law. So by establishing a presence in law schools, recruiting students, hosting activities, debating first principles, and creating academic scholarships and many other activities, the Federalist Society created the conditions ripe for constitutional change. Does anybody want to discuss this particular slide? Emma, Natalie?
Yeah, I think the Federalist Society have been playing the long game.
Yes.
They've always been in the background, even when the Democrats have been winning in the judiciary or wherever, in the Senate. They've always been in the background, doing their thing, pushing forward.
Yes.
And I think it is Federal Society is one of the reasons why we are where we are today. Federal Society goes way back to Reagan, and they all fought the same way. So I think it's very important, something that needs to be seen, and how they're working today as well, because they're still at it.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Even though, to be honest with you, they've got what they wanted in the judiciary.
They have.
Came over in 2016, 2017 with Trump.
They've
worked very hard to do it, and they've got there. They're actually winning. I think,
and with all the, and I think you've already mentioned about money, or somebody's mentioned about money, but with all, I mean, lots of people do all these things at university. Like we're very full of action at university, because students have got zeal for things. So like they might have a feminist society, they might have a debating society, and all those things kind of fizzle out and die if there's no muscle behind it. So we know there must be money and power behind it for this to have as successful as it will be.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I was going to say, because I think the biggest donor was a 1.6 billion one who gave that to Federal Society. And when you look at the Federal Society and how they've grown, just from a student, from students into the powerful entity that it is today, it's very powerful. And we can see when we look deeper into the Federal Society what they're after. They're after the executive. And when I looked at this deeper, that's exactly what they're doing, and they're getting what they want. They're sort of moving with it. They've got other Federal Societies in other countries, especially in London as well, and they've really grown. And how they keep people interested in the policies and laws, or whatever they want people, especially new lawyers, to understand, is they keep having these debates and seminars. They have them on a regular basis. And what they do when they have lawyers and people like that attending these societies, attending these seminars, basically it's training them into the principles that they want them to understand, and also influencing in what the Federal Society stands for. This is how they get them. And what happens to those particular lawyers then is that they shift, and when they feel that they're and they've got to be a Federal Society member, when they feel they're ready, or when there's an opening in government, it's those lawyers from the Federal Society that are being sort of pushed into these government positions.
It sounds like this Federalist Society and the people that have made it up, Natalie, you said it goes all the way back to Reagan, is that these people who have this mindset have really taken on the phrase, the personal is political, and they believe that, and they've made it their end goal to fulfill that phrase, because they can see just how much society is influenced by politics, and so they recognize that the way to shape society is to target politics, and so they've put, as you said, all their money, all their eggs in that basket, and that's how they've, I'll say in inverted commas, won. They've gone through a political systematic process of overhauling the system.
Even though these students realised that they in their opinion that the Liberals were more dominant, what really shifted them to become a society was exactly when Reagan made a speech. And when he made this speech, it was then, after that, that they thought, right, we're going to take this now and go with it, sort of thing. So it wasn't until they didn't come into society until they were asked to do so by Reagan. And we're going to go through what Reagan's speech was a bit later on in the presentation as well. So we'll sorry.
I just wanted to say, you said before about they have these conferences, which we know they have them yearly, but they did have all different types of people at the conferences. They made it democratic in the sense, democracy in the sense they had libertarians, all different types of conservatives, different types of conservatives, Republicans. So they wanted to have the debate to see what was going on in society as well, and people's thoughts. And the other thing I wanted to ask was, can you tell me what you meant when you said that the Federal Society want to take over the executive branch? Can Debbie answer that, please?
Yeah, can we go back later on in the slides, because we're sort of going too forward, and it will explain it in the slide. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Can I just say something?
Is that sorry?
It's Brian. Can I just say something?
Yes, certainly. Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just listening to how this has developed, this Federalist Society has developed.
Yes.
It kind of reminds me about anything in life that is worth anything. This is exactly what happens. And I'm thinking maybe a little bit outside of this, the American system. I'm looking at the Catholic Church, the way they have grown and how they grow. They plan these things. I forget their councils. You know, they have councils, I think, that plan ahead for the next 50 years. And they meticulously go through that plan and fulfill it every time. And we're seeing the results of that many, many years later. Yes. And I think that with what we're studying right now, it's not as though the Catholic Church is not aware of what is going on. They are part of the big picture, if I may say.
Hey, Brian, it's Natalie. A lot of these Federal Society people are Catholic.
Ah, there you are.
They are. Some of them say they're they're conservative, but when you look into them, they're quite Catholic, and some of them have come from the Catholic Church.
And that's how they've got the judges that they've got in are Catholic. Most of them are Catholic. Exactly. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Okay, good point, Brian. Thank you very much. Have you finished your point, Brian?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on then. If anybody else have any questions about this slide, we'll move on. So additionally, by achieving acceptance of their once deemed radical legal ideas from those authority voices that determine what the law is and should be, or what the proper legal ideas and theories are, the Federal Society created the intellectual capital for Supreme Court decision makers to institute constitutional change. So what's the intellectual capital? It's the value of a company's employee, knowledge, skills, business training, or any proprietary information that may provide the company with a competitive advantage. So this is how the Federal Society did it. So the Federal Society created the intellectual capital for Supreme Court decision makers to institute constitutional change. Does anybody want to make any comments about that? Do you want to make anything about that, Emma?
It's very clever, isn't it, actually? I was just thinking about what Natalie said about inviting all different parties to come to your meetings. Even the fact that you've got authority for people to come to your meeting, you've got some influence to bring them, says you've got some power already, but they're trying to influence people in a certain direction, I suppose, so that what the law is should be what the proper legal ideas and theories are. So that intellectual capital, so they're bringing minds together who they know have got power and influence. Yes. And they are coming together to influence the Supreme Court, basically, and to put people on the Supreme Court who think the same way.
Exactly, and that's the idea. And Emma, that's the idea of being a Federal Society member and keeping them there, because by having these seminars, they keep their rhetoric and their understanding of whatever theories they want them to understand. They keep it within the Federal Society, and that way they don't think other out of the box. They just think what the Federal Society want them to think. This is the idea of having these seminars in the first place, and keep having.
But then again, it's very similar. I keep thinking of it's like the movement. We've just got similar ideology. When you really believe strongly in ideology, this is the right way and the only way to do things. This is where we're going to put people in place who agree with us, and we're going to be happy to be part of a society that will promote our ideas and promote me having those ideas. And it's very similar to what we do. So yeah.
But we know that there's an underlining agenda for it as well.
We've got an agenda as well.
Underlining agenda, yeah, and I think the agenda is they want to make a conservative right-wing society.
Yes, of course. That's why they're after the executive. They can get executives and getting the judges in.
Rose had a hand up, I think, there, Debbie. I don't know if you saw it.
Oh, keep on. I can't see it. So, Rose, do you want to answer
Oh, okay. I wanted to contribute saying that there's a time I watched a Frontline documentary that was talking about how people like Mitch McConnell have influenced so much, to the extent that if he sits down and he decides this person fits this position, they work so hard to make sure that that person is in office. You remember how he denied Obama's appointment of a judge.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
And then in Trump's administration, he just switches, and then they make a recommendation and the voting was done. I'm forgetting the lady's name. I'm sorry.
I know you're talking about.
Yeah. So you can. I wanted to comment on the effects of it. That this is something that has taken time to be built. And in that documentary, they were talking about. I think it was Boak, who was not treated well by the Democrats, and then they said this is never going to happen again, and we'll like a time will come when we'll pay back. And you can see that they've really worked and put so much effort to it. And like Emma said, it's similar to what we do. And in as much as we say, but they have an agenda, we also have an agenda, to have people saved. But all I want to say is, if you look at how the conservatives have worked so hard to build the system, and the effects it now has, especially in our generation, you can see that it's something that might not even be easy to dismantle,
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely.
The strength of it, it's hard to dismantle, I guess.
Yeah, amen. Thank you for that, Rose. Yeah, definitely food for thought there. Thank you for the contribution, Rose. Does anybody else want to make a statement or?
Debbie, Susan's put a question in the chat.
Yes, can you
read it? Is it indoctrination going on in these seminars?
Well, I suppose it is. The thing is, if they're influencing them, then I would say yes.
I would like to say, though, that there are a lot of independent thinkers that go to these conferences that do not get indoctrinated.
But
what do we mean when we say indoctrination? Sorry.
Try and win people over. I'm assuming that's what it means. What do you mean, Suzanne?
Yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, influencing and persuading.
Yes, yeah, exactly, Susan. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Typically, when we use indoctrination, it is that. I think it is, but it sounds like a dirty word. It sounds like a bad thing.
Does it? All right. Okay.
But it's not.
No, it isn't. It's very powerful when it works. Right. Okay. So we'll move on from this event if nobody has anything else to say. We'll move forward. So how did the Federal Society make constitutional change? So how did the Federal Society make constitutional change? The conditions readied for transformation, the Federal Society altered the direction of constitutional law from the course of the civil rights movement and the rights revolution. So the civil rights movement was around about the 1950s, 60s, probably in the 70s. This is where this is the direction that that the constitutional law came from. Okay, from the civil rights movement and the rights revolution. We just spoke about the rights revolution. So the Federal Society transformed the law by building a conservative network to counter the liberal legalism they saw embedded in all of society's legal institutions. Okay, so they transformed it and built a conservative network to counter the liberal legalism. The Federal Society is a society of ideas united around shared principles and shared grievances. It also functions as a talent agency that recruits and educates young lawyers in conservative libertarian philosophy, as an employment agency that matches its best and brightest with conservative judges and elite conservative lawyers to keep the Conservative pipeline flowing. Now, that's we just spoke about this. I think this is very imperative, this point. So the Federalist Society is also a network that keeps conservative and libertarian intellectuals connected to continue developing their ideas and encouraging activism among its members to disperse and implement its conservative view. So it spreads it and applies it. Right, does anybody want to speak about this particular slide? I think it's quite informative, this one. Does anybody want to add? Is that you, Curtis? Sorry.
No, Debbie, it's Brian.
Hello, Brian.
I wasn't there right at the beginning. I just want to know who's writing this. Is it pro or against?
It's middle of the. It's from. I got this information from a thesis, and so it's not one way or the other.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that's the best way to read it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Does anybody else want to make any comment about what we've just read? Does that help them or give them more information in understanding how they've gone about it? Emma, Natalie?
Yeah, you can only make constitutional change when you do what they did with Trump, and Leonard Leo from the Federal Society made sure that he put forward the 3 justices that would make that change, which they did with Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, they did.
LGBTQ and all the other stuff.
Yeah, this is how they do it.
They've done the job well.
They have.
And they wouldn't have done it without Leonard Leo.
No.
Hi, Debbie.
Who's that? Mercy?
It's Rose again.
I can't see who's there, so sorry. Hello, Rose.
Okay, I wanted to comment saying that if you see their agenda is to like derail the gains that the civil rights movement and the rights revolution have done.
Yeah.
And it's very feasible again with what the judges that are in our dispensation are doing, trying to overturn the gains, Roe versus Wade, trying to overturn the gains of the civil rights. Yes. And it's unfortunate that the Democrats have been sleeping, and we've like there was contentment to say, oh, we've achieved this.
I agree with you, Rose. I agree with you that,
and they didn't push. But you see, the other side was pushing hard, So it's like the Democrats just said we achieved and we're fine, and they relaxed. But they didn't notice what the Republicans are doing and the conservatives, and the effect now.
Did you say that they didn't know?
I said they didn't pay attention.
No, they did. They did, Rose. I was going to say, when I looked at, I did a paper before, a study before, and they knew what was going on. They knew and understood what was going on. But I don't know why they didn't stop it. But I've got a paper from one of the, the Democratic, I can't remember his name now, but it's in my previous study. I put all the information in there. They understood what was going on. They did, Rose. But I don't know if they felt they were powerless to stop it. I don't know. And I think it was because they let it go on for so long and didn't nip it in the bud. So I think, when you look at my previous presentation, I do put in there that they did know, and I even put the name of the MP who spoke about it, a Democratic MP. But go on, Rose. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Fine. I'll look at that study. But I think what maybe the proper way to say it is that they didn't act when they were acting.
Amen.
They let it go. I think they had the potential to stop it at some point, but now it's too big. You see, because they let it just go, and now to try and stop its effects and it seems like it's so beyond. I don't know. Maybe
I tend to think that that's an important point that Rose just made, and I guess when I was saying earlier, the point that I was trying to make earlier when I said that the Federalist Society and all those that make up it really took on the phrase "the personal is political." It seems like they understand how to get things done, and so as has been said, they went about a very systematic approach of getting things done. And it's easy for us to see, these people as evil. And I would suggest, they're not evil. I'm sure we disagree with, the principles or how they interpret the Constitution and etc. But as has been echoed before, if we just substitute Federalist Society with our movement, we go about things the exact same way, and we would encourage each other to form these networks in which we educate, or should I say indoctrinate people, and get society to move in the direction that we want it to. But because we don't really take on the phrase "the personal is political," and we don't see how important the political influences our personal lives, we don't get things done. Like Rose said, the Democrats just fall off the wagon. Obviously, there's more to the story than the simple picture that I'm painting. But yeah, that's what happens when you don't take the personal as political.
And when you look at the very the last sentence, to continue developing their ideas and encouraging activism, vigorous campaigning to bring about their political or social change. Do you know what I mean? So that you can see they're working hard to implement these things.
And they put a lot of money into that.
They did.
And I just wanted to say that Ruth Bader Ginsburg knew exactly what was coming, and she warned of it. She knew that the court was going to tip the balance. She was afraid of that, and that's why she worked so long, longer than she wanted to, because she knew what was coming.
Amen. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah. Right. Okay. Does anybody else want to add anything to this slide? If not, we'll move on. So what is the purpose of the Federal Society? So what is the purpose of the Federal Society? So the Federal Society, as the facilitator, has created a vast conservative libertarian legal network that has altered the trajectory of the law, right? So its aim, which has been largely successful, was to reshape the entirety of legal culture. Okay, their aim was to reshape the entirety of legal culture. So one part of its strategy has been to develop the intellectual basis for conservative and libertarian constitutional theory that could be adopted by justices in the Supreme Court opinions, thereby transferring theories into law. So the Federal Society acts as a facilitator. What's a facilitator? It's a personal thing that makes an action process easier or easier. So the facilitator's role helps to guide and manage group discussions and activities in order to achieve specific goals or outcomes. They act as a neutral party who promotes open communication, fosters collaboration, and ensures that all parties are heard and their contributions are valued. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? It says also they largely successful was to reshape the entirety of legal culture. So what is the legal culture? The network of values and attitudes relating to law. That's what we're talking about, legal culture, which determines when and why and where people turn law or government, or turn away. So legal cultures can be examined by reference to fundamentally different legal systems. And then we talk about the court. So it says that they develop the intellectual basis for conservative and libertarian constitutional theory that can be adopted by justices in the Supreme Court opinions. So a system of ideas and a theories, a system of ideas, set of principles or beliefs or policies, procedures proposed. And where do they want these to be? In the Supreme Court. Okay, so they want these things and they're aiming for the Supreme Court, which is the top court. Does anybody have anything to add to this slide? If not, we'll move on.
I was just wondering what could have been done to stop them. I know Rosemary. Oh, Debbie, can you hear me? Sorry, I think our
I can
internet.
hear you, sorry, yeah. Emma, I'll stay on here. I was just going to move.
Hello? Can you hear me, Debbie?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, just saying, I'm just wondering what could have been done to stop them, or whether, I know Rose made a point about not enough was done, so I don't know if I can.
The only thing I think would stop this, it's not just having like the Federalist Society. You need a lot of things. It's time and chance. You need a lot of things to come together at the same time. So if we didn't have Steve Bannon and we didn't have Trump, we wouldn't have had Leonard Leo being able to bring forth the list to bring in the 3 judicial justices that he wanted Trump to bring in, and then everything collapsed and folded after that with Roe v. Wade and LGBTQ. So it's all about time and chance, the right people doing the right thing at the right time, and I think that's how.
And remember, these societies are very powerful. They've got a lot of wealthy backers.
Yeah, they have, but if all the other things didn't fit into place, like Steve Bannon didn't work with Trump, and Trump wasn't the man at the time when Leonard Leo. Just, it's all about timing and having the right people there at the right time.
When you think about Leonard Leo, he's absolutely when you say Catholic, he's ultra Catholic. And when you think about you say getting the right people together, you would never think that Leonard Leo, who's an ultra Catholic, would get on with Trump, but they did. When you look into their relationship, they got on well together.
The only reason that they got on together was because Trump wanted to be president, and Trump wanted the Republican votes. And he knew if he would bring in Leonard Leo, he would get them. That's why.
Natalie, you speak about time and chance. Like, we recognize that this is, in the great controversy, we'll say this is one of Satan's tools, or one of Satan's foot soldiers on earth in getting their propaganda into shaping the great controversy. If Leonard Leo wasn't there, do you think that Satan would have had someone else? Or if Donald Trump wasn't there, there would have just been someone else. So I don't think it hangs on those people as individuals. I don't know. That's how I see it, at least.
Could be. Could be. And what's Natalie, answer to that one?
I suppose the deeper question. Oh, sorry, I don't know if Natalie wanted to respond. She's saying, I'm not sure. I suppose.
No, I don't want to respond.
Don't respond to that. She's still. I think I suppose on a bigger level, we know that prophecy is going to be fulfilled. So there's going to be these evil forces that come forth. But I'm just wondering if when, say, the left wing or the Democrats saw this Federalist Society and what they were doing, what they could have done. I mean, do we need a democratic society that, in law, that would have tried to, a left-wing liberal society that pushes its agenda equally? And you might say, well, they couldn't because they didn't have the financial backing. So that's one thing. But is it the left? We just slow off the ground, or what? What is it about it? I don't know.
Democrats did have financial backing.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting that they haven't taken the political fight as seriously as the Republicans have, because after the civil rights era, they were what's the term we use? Like
Content.
Yeah, still back on the leaves.
Lame duck.
I know there's a word we use to say galvanize. Yes. They were ignited to say, hold on, if we keep letting society go in this direction, then we're going to lose. Society is not going to be in our worldview. So after the 1960s and whatever, they decided to take things super seriously. And as Rose pointed out, after civil rights, Democrats for decades have felt that, we've achieved everything. Let's take our foot off the pedal. They went through that process of political campaigning. The 1960s is evident of that. And so
the backlash of that campaign.
Yeah, exactly. It's the backlash that's what gave fuel to conservatives to take things seriously. So I think Democrats have money. They have had money to do what they want. But
perhaps we undermined the role of the Supreme Court as well, and the role of the power of the Supreme Court. I don't know.
Yeah.
And also, it sounds like the left just became Laodicean, if we're going to use spiritual language.
Yeah.
Said, we won a victory, we've made it. We can just sit back now and not fight like we did before. Yeah.
I think that's quite obvious. I think.
I also wanted to comment that time and chance seems like the there's nothing you can do. Things are just happening. I maybe I got it. I maybe I didn't understand it correctly, but then to say that the Democrats could not do anything because maybe time and chance was not on their side, I would think they could have done much. Let's make it into a parable. When this movement, when a false movement rises up and starts teaching error, do we sit back and we just relax? Or if there's a shaking and another movement is formed, the truth is the elders and teachers begin to teach the correct position, teach the correct thing, and they continue emphasizing in that shaking period, educating people, awakening people, because it's a fight. That's the honest truth. But I would want to think that the Democrats kind of like slumbered, to say we've already gained much, and I don't think that's the position would take if we're putting it in a parable as this movement to say, oh, we already got 500 members, so it's okay. They didn't put much effort to it. They relaxed, and that's where the danger was.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say fair play to them.
Yeah.
They've gone about this very professionally, legally. Everything is above board. It's not a secret society. They've just done what they have to do. Fair play.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you for those comments. Thank you very much. We're just going to move on to the next slide. So this will entail an examination of the Supreme Court as a collective unit through majority opinions. Majority opinions, this is a judicial opinion agreed to by more than half of the members of a court. Majority opinion sets forth the decision of the court and an explanation of the rationale behind the court's decision. So majority opinions. So previous research has revealed the Federalist Society's impact on campaign finance regulations, federalism, and state sovereignty. State sovereignty, a sovereign state that is an area of land that has absolute power over its own laws and liberties. The states in the US have sovereignty to write their own laws and to establish state courts. So, okay, that's state sovereignty, and also on affirmation action and remedial programs. So remedial programs, basically it's to help the students to catch up with their peers, and thus prevent ongoing academic issues, and addresses learning gaps by reteaching certain skills. Okay, so to this scholarship, I add the Federalist Society's impact on voting rights and union organising through its influence on Supreme Court majority opinions. Okay, so does anybody want to discuss this particular slide before we move on? It's going to nearly come to an end real soon.
Debbie, I'm not sure I understood what that definition of majority opinions was. This will entail examinations.
Yeah, it's. I'll say what it is again. Through majority opinions this is a judicial agreed to by more than half of the members of a court. So a majority opinion sets forth the decision of the court and an explanation of the rationale behind the court's decision. Rationale being a set of, reasons or anything like that. Does that explain that? I can't hear Emma, but
yeah, I'm just trying to understand what. Oh, sorry, is it our internet? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. So it keeps out in and out. I can hear you.
Internet.
Yeah.
Dropping in and out. Sorry. It says, I'm just trying to understand the Federalist Society's connection with majority opinion. So majority opinion is, say, the Supreme Court, when you've got 5 or 6 or more on the court who have got the opinion and they pass their opinion. So it's like 6-3, let's say.
Yeah.
And then they start to explain how they got there. That's their explanation of their majority opinion of that. Right. As a collective unit, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I think that's what I understand about that. So what did the Federalist Society, the last bit, it links the Federalist Society to that.
Yes, it does.
Are the Federalist impact on voting rights in union or influence the Supreme Court majority opinions? So it's influenced the Supreme Court majority opinion. Does that just mean it's influenced them to vote this way and there's 6 conservatives now?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Say that again, sorry.
So I'm not sure of the Federalist Society's connection to that majority opinion, what the connection you're making is.
It says previous.
So obviously they place their people. Go on.
Yeah, it says previous research. So it's based on a research has revealed the Federalist Society impact on campaign. And is that the one, or are you talking about majority?
So yes, I'm just trying to make that connection with majority opinion. So the court has a majority opinion on something, and now it's showing how the Federalist Society has impacted. I can't see the link between that and the majority opinion. So yes, they've impacted campaign finance regulations, federalism. I'm not sure what that means exactly, except they're working across the whole country, not just the states, and state sovereignty. So they're bringing individual state sovereignty into it. So they're not probably undermining that. And then they've got affirmative action and remedial programs. So they're, trying to promote seemingly equality or get people up to speed with their studies, but they're obviously brainwashing them in the Federalist Society's viewpoint.
I think.
Go on.
Go on.
No, carry on, Debbie.
No, go on, Curtis. Go on.
I was just gonna say, I think the point that it's making in that last sentence is that as Debbie's explained in the last couple of slides, that by getting their people in to the Supreme Court, they recognize that the Supreme Court has influence over these facets of life, whether it's affirmative action, remedial programs, federalism, state sovereignty, voting rights, all these things. They recognize that the Supreme Court is what influences those. So if they get majority opinion in the Supreme Court, I don't want to say they'll have control, but their worldview will be in control over these matters of life. Exactly. That's how I read that, at least.
I was going to say the slide before says that constitutional theory can be adopted by justices in Supreme Court opinions, thereby transferring theories into law. So I don't know if that's
okay. Yeah, that helps. Yeah,
that's what the previous slide talks about, and then this is obviously, goes on from that. So that's why
like a cycle that they get the Supreme people in there, they vote for these things, then they give their reasons why they voted for those things. That influences public thinking, and they're influencing all of these areas in their scholarship anyway. And then their scholarship is which is the theory, which is now reflected in the Supreme Court's actions, which shape society.
Yeah, thereby transferring theories into law. So this is how they're doing it.
To law, yeah. When they put it into law, that affects society. So like Roe versus Wade is all part of their dogma, their theory about the family and not aborting people and not killing children.
Exactly.
I wanted to say, I think my dad had made in the comment just now about how everything's above board and fair play to them. And from what we've read, we would say they are following the democratic process. Like, all this is democracy, if you ask me. But I think that one of the things that we're recognizing is the weaknesses of democracy, is that as much as this is a government by the people, we can see that it does not reflect the majority in the population's positions or views or etc. etc. And that's, again, one of the dangers that you have with democracy, is that once you get, let's just say, the majority, hypothetically speaking, if the Supreme Court were in power because that's what the majority wanted, you end up with a government that rules for the majority, and the minority, the people who had less votes, their views aren't taken into consideration. And that's democracy. But we can see that that's dangerous.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
It's might be going off a bit. For instance, about little things that the Federalist Society do. For instance, when the justice was getting done for Kavanaugh, was his name, when he was getting done for that, was it rape or something, some attack?
Brett Kavanaugh.
Sexual situation. It was Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society who contributed millions and millions of pounds to a woman's organisation, believe it or not. I think it's called Pro-Life. And these pro-life women actually stood up, I think, in court and supported him. And no, it's got nothing to do with abortion or pro-life. It's just to point out the money behind given to women and to people they need at the right time. And these women stood up for Brett, and Brett got off. I just want to say that, how they were.
I think that links to what Chris was just saying. I suppose that democracy has its failing in the sense that I'm going to say the bully always wins, but the people in the top who have the money and the power, it ends up people with the money have the most muscle, and so then they can influence people in a certain direction. And as you say, even if it is the majority, then the minority suffer. But it probably isn't the majority, because the top, echelons of society are there's a few that have the money can really shape policy and society.
We can see from that as well, but the comments that are coming out, how powerful they are, how they've grown to this little thing, to this bit, and they've gone into a powerful entity because they are getting what they want, because they've got the power behind it to support it. So when we're going to go, when it talks about and state sovereignty, and also on affirmation action is intended to alleviate underrepresentation and to promote the opportunities of defined minority groups within a society to give them equal access to that of the majority population. So we've covered this slide now. I don't know if anybody else wants to discuss this slide before we move on.
I was going to say, with affirmative action, and presumably they would point to people like Clarence Thomas being a black man and Amy Coney Barrett being a white woman as evidence that they are pro-equality and pro, affirming different areas of society, different groups, minority groups. But obviously it's people that agree with their ethos, and they are put there because they're in alignment with the thinking as token gestures that this is working, I suppose.
Funny. I guess this is what bugs me, is that they're hypocrites. That's what bugs me about everything that they do, because people like Clarence Thomas and Amy Coney Barrett got in because of affirmative action.
Gosh. Thank you for that, Curtis. Thank you. We're going to go on to the next slide now. So the Federal Society for Law, I don't know if anybody else wants to read this. Emma, can I get you to read this? Because I've just been reading all the time. So can I get you to read this slide for me, please?
Yes, I'm hoping internet will hold, sorry.
Oh, right.
I don't know. If you can't hear me, stop me, yeah?
Yes, okay.
The Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies is a group of conservatives and libertarians dedicated to reforming the current legal order. We are committed to the principles that the state exists to preserve freedom, that the separation of governmental powers is central to our Constitution, and that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is, not what it should be. The Society seeks to promote awareness of these principles and to further their application through its activities. When the founders of the Federalist Society entered law school in 1980, they faced what they believed to be a liberal dominance in legal action, which advocates a centralized and uniform society. The aim was to insert conservative principles into legal education based on the Federalist Society's core founding principles.
You stop there, Emma. So, Curtis, this is where the principles are going to be brought out now, okay? So go ahead, Emma.
These principles were, and still are, that the state exists to preserve freedom, that the separation of governmental powers is central to our Constitution, and that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is, not what it should be. Just read that. These conservative law students believed the Constitution strictly limited the powers of Congress to those enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof, and also constrained judges to interpret the text.
Right. Do you want to discuss anything named in here?
Yeah. Hi, Debbie. It's Rose.
Hello, Rose.
So I wanted to comment on the bit that says that the judiciary is the one that says what the law is and not what it should be.
Right. Okay.
So I think this is their agenda, because if you look at how the 14th Amendment was used, the 14th Amendment seemed like it was a law that anyone who wants to claim their rights to something can use. It was used by the civil rights, it was used by the women, it was also used by the LGBTQ movement, you know, and it seems like it's a law that can be used to protect anyone. And I think to them it seems like it's, I just stand up and say the 14th Amendment means this, so it should be this. But they want to correct, to say what the law is saying should be something like standard, not something that's fluid, you know, to say today the 14th Amendment means this, tomorrow it means this, the next day it means this. I think that's what irritates the conservative side. if
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah, thank you, Rose. Thank you. Thank you for that. Does anybody else want to make any comment?
Hi, Debbie.
Who's that, sorry?
Melania.
Oh, hello, Melania. How are you?
I'm fine. I just wanted to make a comment on this one, to say that the core agenda or the idea of the Federalist Society is to influence the societal thinking, how society views things and how they interpret them. For example, in the previous slide, when you're talking about the influence of the Federalist Society on the judicial, it's like their agenda is to control how the society views things, like certain laws, for example, abortion laws. So they are not able to change the wording of the law, to change it literally. But what they are going to do is they're going to influence how the society views issues to do with abortion, how they interpret it. So that interpretation, when it's taken into the courts, or the conservative judges, like how the Federalist wants everyone to be conservative, obviously they're going to win the case because they all they have the same view like the conservative view. So if you look at this one now, their core principles are all conservative. That's their main agenda, and everything that they are doing, they want to return back the society to its conservative state.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're doing. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Exactly. And to do that, they need their people in.
And it's very subtle. Sorry.
It has been, and they've been very successful in doing that. Emma, sorry.
It's very subtle because those 3 points that are made there, that was made twice, that the state exists to preserve freedom, we would agree with that you know, this is the land of liberty and the principles of which America was based. So when we say freedom, and obviously in our movement, we understand that freedom and equality are colliding. And that's where we would disagree. But 10 years ago, we would have agreed with all these principles to preserve freedom, that the separation of government powers is central to the Constitution, that you have executive, judiciary, and legislative separated on purpose, checks and balances to make sure that there's no corruption and dictatorship. But as we've said, democracy can be abused, which it has been, you know, in this situation. And it's emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is. And this goes back to originalism. Thus saith the Lord. This is what we think it is on our agenda, not what it should be.
In other words,
they're making it, they're not changing the law. They're not making it, into what they want it to be. They're not shaping it in terms of their agenda. They're saying this is what the law says, but that's obviously open to interpretation. So we would agree with those principles before. We'd have said, yes, thus saith the Lord, yes, separate the government powers, and yes, preserve freedom. Those are all good principles. And it's just the whole enforcement of them now. We've shifted our viewpoint, and we understand that equality and the minority now get abused when you do that. And obviously their agenda is pro Sunday law in that sense, pro restriction of people's liberties, really at the advantage of the few over the suffering of the majority, really. But we would in essence have agreed with all 3 things. And when you're arguing with somebody, it's quite difficult to, because we use the same terms but we understand something different. So I was arguing with someone who I know is not on the message in conservative circles, and I was saying, yes, but it's about freedom of people to worship according to their conscience and to behave how they want when in terms of, you know, LGBTQ and those groups. And they said, yeah, freedom, I absolutely agree with you, we need freedom, and that the government should be there to almost using these words, to preserve freedom, to support freedom. I thought, oh, they agree with me. And then I realized, wait a minute, you know, this is at the expense of equality. So I brought in equality, and they seem to even agree with that. But I thought the way we're using these terms it's really conspiratorial, and you just can't argue, because they're understanding something different even about equality. because they'd say, yes, affirmative action to a degree, it works. But the way we interpret and implement affirmative action is to, is abuse it really, to put the people we want in, not really to give people equal opportunity. So it's really subtle. It's quite hard to argue with someone, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emma. We're going to be moving on now. So the court, they believed, had been derelict in its duties to adhere closely to the text by finding rights not explicitly written, and therefore judges were saying what the law, should be, that is, implementing a social agenda. So implementing a social agenda, a kind of picture of what society should be like and how people should treat each other and so forth. So in the preceding decades, the court had been taking a more active role in desecrating and protecting the rights of criminal defendants. In addition, the so-called conservative Burger Court had granted the right of privacy, which allowed women to obtain an abortion. Therefore, conservatives saw liberal reformers aided by the Supreme Court using the courts to expand rights not explicitly stated in the Constitution and contrary to the conservative viewpoint. I'm just going to come back to what the Burger Court was. The Burger Court was was a period in the history of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1969 to 1986. So it was called the Burger Court because it was the Chief Justice was Warren Burger, and he served as the Chief Justice of the United States. So the Burger Court is generally considered to be the last liberal court to date. It has been described as a transitional court due to its transition from having the liberal rulings of the Warren Court to the conservative rulings of the Rehnquist Court. The Rehnquist Court was called the Rehnquist Court because it was, I can't remember his name, I think it's William Rehnquist, and he succeeded Warren Burger. So, and this Rehnquist Court was sort of more conservative. Does anybody have any questions on that slide? Or can we move?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, go on.
Okay, I was going to ask, I'm not too familiar on how this system works. Laws are made in what we call the parliament, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where laws are actually made? And then they are passed on to the judiciary to dispense judgment on.
Right, okay.
Is that how it works?
Well, we're talking about the American courts here. So
yeah.
When you have laws.
So same thing.
Yeah, when you have laws, you've got the legislative that makes the laws.
Yeah. So the Senate and what's the other house? They make the law.
Yeah, he's tasked with writing the statutes of the laws, right? And then you've got the judicial, which interprets the laws. They don't write them, but they interpret them. And it's appointed by the executive and confirmed by the legislative branch.
I think that the weakness in that whole system is when it's passed from one house to the other. When it comes from the lawmakers to the judiciary now, instead of dishing out the law, they are actually now, they further explain and have their view on what that law is. It may not be representative of where it originated. Because the people elect the Senate and the House, and those people know what they want from the people that elected them. But by the time it gets to the judiciary meddle with this people like that are picked from the Federalist Society. I think that's where a great weakness is, if I'm right in understanding the way the law is made.
And Curtis, were you going to say something? Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Debbie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or anyone else. But when Congress and Senate write a law, let's just say this is going to be ridiculous, but no stealing after 10 p.m. They sign that into law, and it becomes, and then it goes to the president or the executive branch, and the president stamps that into law. That becomes law. What happens with the judiciary is that when someone goes and steal or whatever, and then it comes into court, I don't know, correct, this is where I need correction. Are they interpreting that law, or are they interpreting whether that law fits into the Constitution? So they deal with the Constitution, and it's whether that law is legal or illegal based on what the Constitution says. So it's not necessarily the law, but it's the Constitution that they have oversight over.
Well, when it goes to the legislative branch, they make the laws. So the House of Representatives and Senate, they write it, right? So then it goes to the next stage, and it's the judicial which enforces or interprets the laws. Okay, and they don't write them; they just interpret them. And I think that is appointed then by the executive branch, as it's confirmed by the legislative branch. It's actually the executive branch that actually implements it, that enforces it. So it has to go through, I would say, the judicial first, where they interpret the laws, like you just said, to see if it does fit in with the Constitution. And it's only then that it's given to the executive branch. I think the president has got the power to say yes or no to accept a certain law. You know, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, Emma.
Yeah, I don't think it goes through the judiciary before the president.
No, I didn't say before. It goes to them, and then it goes to the executive, because they interpret the laws.
Yeah, and I'm saying I don't think it's that way around.
You don't.
And also, I think that interpretation for me is the weakness, because now, if you're interpreting it based on let me put it this way: if they're interpreting it based on federal society ways of thinking, because they belong to that organization, then it's messed up. It's no longer the will of the people, because the two houses are supposedly there to represent the will of the people.
Unless it's written, and then it goes to the executive, and then they. But I mean, for them to enforce it, for the executive branch to enforce it, I'm sure for him to sort of come out with it, the law, and then say, yes, we accept this law, I'm sure it has to go through the judicial to interpret it first. But anyway, Emma or
I think that is part of it. I'm just trying to look at here the Supreme Court and what it does. And it has several functions, but it has ultimate appellate jurisdiction over all federal court cases and over state court cases that involve a point of US constitutional or federal law. And I think so the court holds the power of judicial review, the ability to invalidate a statute for violating a provision of the Constitution. It also has able to strike down presidential directives for violating either the Constitution or statutory law. However, it may act only within the context of a case in an area of law over which it has jurisdiction. So it's quite complex, but I think it seems to me that when a court case comes to them because they're an appeal from the lower courts, and they now have to decide what their decision is based, it says is they have to interpret the meaning of a law to decide whether it's relevant to that particular set of facts, or to rule on how a law should be applied.
Is that the judicial?
That's the judicial, yeah.
Right,
so
okay.
It doesn't hold trials itself. The court's task is to interpret the meaning of law in other cases. So if an appeal case is brought, but I think they can step in if they feel that the law is unconstitutional that's been passed. But that's what they're still trying to.
That's what they're there for, to interpret the laws, yeah.
And I think that's the point that. Sorry, carry on.
Go on, Curtis. Is that the question? Is whether they just can't stand up and start interpreting unless they've got a particular case they're dealing with, I think.
Yeah.
Is that your question, Curtis?
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say. Like, once the Congress write a law, they can't just say, oh, hold on, rephrase that or whatever. They have to wait for cases to come up. And I think that's the point my dad was making, is that when that law goes into effect, is that, and they decide this criminal is either guilty or not guilty based on how they interpret it, it's passed, because those judiciary people are not put in by the people. They no longer govern for the people. They govern based on their worldview, whereas the Congress men and women were put in by the people. So those senators and those House of Representatives who were put in to make liberal laws, they've done their job. That's where the people's voice is heard. But now when it's time for that law to be heard in court, the people no longer have a say because the judges weren't put in by the people.
No, exactly. Thank you for that.
I don't know how judges are put in the state level.
They're nominated by government as well. That's why we say Trump has had judges in the circuit, in all the circuit. All those judges were
so if
appointed.
It's predominantly Democrat and it's nominated Democratic judges, it will have a Democratic court, presumably. Or it shouldn't be. It should be totally without bias. But they're going to put their people in, and then if the Federalist Society, if it's a Republican state, they might have a more Republican court. Would that be how it works?
I think the president also nominates judges in Democratic lands or Republican lands.
Yeah, that's true.
Simba has his hand, or Melania, one of the two.
Melania, can you go ahead, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to comment in this one. I agree with Brian has said, to say that the whole issues on interpretation, how the law is being interpreted. That's why earlier on I have said that the whole issue is about changing the how the society thinks, how the society views certain issues, especially those ones which are very topical in societies, like abortion laws, LGBTQ laws. So now the law will just say every man is created with inalienable rights of freedom. They say freedom of choice or who to associate with. So it's now up to the judiciary or the judges to interpret what that law means. So that is very pivotal. That is why earlier on when we spoke of, when we did those studies about the evangelicals taking over America, we were centering the whole agenda on the judiciary because that is where the whole issue is emanating from. The law is there, but how they interpret the law is the greatest thing that we need to consider, because it might mean something else to someone, but to them, they'll interpret it in a conservative way because they are aligned to federalistic principles, which are very much conservative. So now the law in America is being interpreted on conservative grounds. Instead of opening up their minds and be liberal, they tend to be conservative. So the whole issue is about how readest thou, just like internally in the movement or in Adventist circles, the battle between the Adventists, like the church, the main church, the Adventist church, and us, is how we read the scriptures. We read the same Bible, we read the same verses, but it means differently to us and to them. When they are reading a certain verse, it will mean something else to them. When we read the same verse, it will mean something else to us. So that's the same with America. When they are reading a certain law, it means something to them as Democrats, for example, and when these conservatives read, they get another meaning. So the issue is about how you read the law. So the whole issue, the whole agenda of the Federalistic Society is to try and turn the mindsets of the American people to be conservative.
Yes,
so that they will further their agenda.
Amen. Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you very much, Melania. Does anybody else have anything to say before we move on to the next slide? Okay. Curtis, can you read the next slide for me, please?
Yep, sure thing. This was being done in the name of social justice, a role not within the court's jurisdiction and contrary to their vision of the Constitution, which primarily protects property rights and upholds individual rights, not group rights. The conservatives' complaint was that the civil rights and civil liberties granted to African Americans, women, and criminal defendants were based on group membership, not due to a personal harm or a current and direct violation. The Constitution, they argued, was not meant to address disparities, inequalities, treatment due to discrimination based on group status, but rather intentional discrimination of a specific individual. It was with this view of the current environment that the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies was formed to challenge legal liberalism. As a political, now defining that, as a political doctrine and ideology, liberalism emphasized individual freedom, equality, and democracy. Hence, it was a revolutionary idea that challenged the traditional social and political hierarchies and insert a conservative understanding of constitutional law into legal education.
Thank you. Curtis, please.
So there's some things I understand and some things towards the end that confuse me a bit. One is, it seems that the interpretation of what the Constitution was created for, what courts are meant to protect, is based on us as people, personal people, individuals in a society. It's there to protect a case-by-case basis. And that sounds, great on the surface. Whereas they are saying that after the civil rights movement, we'll say Democrats believe that the Constitution and the judiciary is there to protect society at large, so to protect groups outside of their personal standing in said society. So you should be protected because you are a woman, and because you're a person of color, you're part of this group, as opposed to their thinking that irrespective of that, let's not take those things into consideration. We're going to go case by case. So let's not make group laws. Let's make things for people, personal people. So those are the two views. But then what confused me is when they bring up that second last sentence, it was with this view of the current environment. So this Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies is then created to challenge liberalism. And then they define liberalism as individual freedom, challenging traditional social and political hierarchies. So liberalism is the individual beyond the group, if you want to say it that way. But I thought that's what they were fighting, civil rights and civil liberties against.
Thank you, Curtis.
I don't know, that last bit confuses me.
Okay, Emma, do you want to answer?
I think I'm still trying to understand it. When you were speaking then, I thought that's what they were against as well. So they were focusing on the individual as opposed to the group.
Yeah.
And they're arguing now, they're forming a challenge against legal liberalism, which is about the individual, but maybe it's the way they see the individual. So I'm not sure that last part. Because the last part says, and insert a conservative understanding of constitutional law into legal education. So maybe the way they understand individual freedom, equality, and democracy is different, as opposed to doctrine of individual freedom, equality, and democracy.
That's the way that I saw it, and you just said that, yeah.
And they're challenging that freedom, equality, and democracy.
Yeah.
Can I just mention something?
Yes, go ahead.
That point, that last bit that I think Emma's reading, or that Curtis mentioned, hence it was revolutionary idea that challenged the traditional social and political hierarchies and insert a conservative understanding of constitutional law into the legal education. This is where it all begun, because if you go to Harvard Law School or somewhere like that, they actually have a curriculum from the Federal Society. So this is where it all begun. This is revolutionary, that they could get their thoughts and ideology into law, into the education system, and this is where they got power.
Yeah, this is where it all began. Does that answer your question, Curtis?
No.
It doesn't. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I just know what Emma did, especially within some constitutional into legal education.
I think because we can repeat the question, I think, because Natalie's saying, what's the question?
I was in the toilet when the question came through.
I think the question of this is, the first part seems to be saying that the Conservatives now want to focus on, so the second sentence was, the Conservative complaint was that the civil rights and civil liberties granted to African Americans, women and criminals was based on group membership, not due to personal harm or a current and direct violation. So they're saying what's wrong in essence with, I think this is what they're saying, what's wrong with the civil rights movement is it was all about the rights of a whole group of people, and you can't do that. You've got to look at the individual case by case, and see whether there's personal harm or current and direct violation, and do it on an individual basis, rather than look at a whole group and say this discrimination is based on a group status, but let's look at a specific individual's case. And it was with that view of the current environment, the Federalist Society for Law and Policy Studies was formed to challenge legal liberalism. So it was challenging legal liberalism, because legal liberalism, we thought, accepted the group thing. But then in the brackets it says, as a political doctrine and ideology, liberalism emphasized individual freedom, equality and democracy. So Curtis's question was, that seems to be what they're defending. They're trying to defend, let's look at the individual case, which is what it says here, that liberalism is, it defends the freedom, equality and democracy on the individual level. So Curtis's question was, why is that seems contradictory? So why are they arguing with that when it is about the individual on the liberal side? And I was trying to put forth, I think, that they must have a different understanding of the individual, the liberals. It must be subtle. I don't know. I'm trying to find out the answer to this question because I'm not sure either.
Yeah, because the Federal Society, they work on the individual as well.
That's what they're saying here. They're saying these Conservatives are working on the individual because that undermines the group. So I think, because when I say a black person comes to court and we say it's because the whole system is anti-blacks that they're in this problem, and they've got racial discrimination going on here because a white person attacked them, for instance, they'll say, no, let's not talk about the group. Let's just talk about the individual here. And they may have been attacked because they've got, more money or something. It's nothing to do with them being black. So they'll undermine the systemic racial issue, I think, by focusing on the individual. But this point is that they're now trying to combat liberal individualism, but because liberals believe in individuals defending the individual. So I think they're trying to reinterpret what that looks like. By the way, I've just said it undermines the equality issue, I'm assuming. So when a liberal says individual freedom, equality and democracy, the right-wing people are saying, yeah, we agree with all that in principle, but they don't really. But they're going to undermine the equality part of it, and they're going to stress the freedom part of it because it's all about the individual and their rights, regardless of the equality part, I think.
Yeah, it just depends what their liberalism looks like.
Yeah,
if it doesn't fit in with our ideology, then we're not going to agree.
Okay, that's something I need to look deeper into then. Thank you for that, by the way. We're going to go on because time is moving on now. Can anybody read this next one? We've just got this and just another slide to go. Can anybody out there? I can't see who's out there, so can somebody
make it a bit bigger, Debbie? That's quite small.
Oh, can I add this bigger? How do I make this bigger? It's on the slide, isn't it?
Oh, you just zoom out. Oh, I can make it bigger. Sorry, I can make it bigger.
I can read it if no one wants to read it.
Please, yes. I don't know how to make it bigger on the slide. Sorry.
No, don't worry. I think we can do it.
The on-campus chapters are an essential first step in attracting students at the start of their legal training, starting from the ground level, grooming the students throughout their legal education, and at completion supplying credentialed conservative lawyers ready to put what they learned into action. Lawyer divisions were added in 1986 to bring together attorneys, business and policy leaders, judges, and others interested in examining and improving the state of law. There are currently 90 lawyers chapters across the nation. The lawyer divisions function to keep alumni wedded to the Federalist Society's principles while building a network of conservative practicing lawyers who could coordinate conservative activity within the ABA, American Bar Association, and other facets of legal culture. In 1995, the Federalist Society created its practice groups to counter the perceived liberal bias of the American Bar Association sections and the absence of discussions of traditional legal values in existing bar organizations. The practice groups were organized by legal topic, which paralleled those in the ABA, to allow conservative lawyers to coordinate with others in their specialty to develop legal arguments and legal strategies. and to be intellectually armed and ready to take advantage of political and legal opportunities that arise. The practice groups connect conservative lawyers by mutual interest to develop alternative conservative legal arguments, to counterbalance negative trends that are developing due to government action, judicial overreaching, or leftward pressures by the organized bar. The practice groups were also designed to impact public policy by allowing conservative lawyers to network with public policy leaders within their area of expertise and follow and focus on specific policy issues. The practice lawyers groups also promote pro bono opportunities through connecting Federalist Society lawyers in private practice to various conservative public interest law firms. The faculty division was started in 1999 with its own inaugural event and a mission similar to other groups, connecting law professors interested in limited government, the separation of powers, constitutional theory, the original understanding of the Constitution, and the importance of property rights and free markets. The Federalist Society's faculty conferences encourage professors to advance traditional legal principles in the legal academy and beyond. So in essence, all this is saying is that the Federalist Society has created networks, has created small divisions, has encouraged people to come together so that when people leave the university, they have inroads into making a difference in society according to their worldview, obviously influencing the Bar Association, influencing the courts, influencing legal practices, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Curtis. So what is the American Bar Association? So the American Bar Association is a voluntary bar association of lawyers and law students. It has more than 400,000 members, so it's quite large. It provides law school accreditations, continuing legal education, information about the law, programs to assist lawyers and judges in their work, and initiatives to improve the legal system for the public. So that's what the American Bar Association is. But I should imagine this is quite self-explanatory. So does anybody else want to comment on this before we move on to the final slide? Okay. Okay, so Emma, could you read the final slide for me, please?
Sorry, Emma's nipped out.
Oh, is she? Do you want to read it, Natalie?
I'll try. My eyes are not great. Of special importance to the conservative and the libertarian movement is the Federalist Society's role in identifying individuals who shared core legal principles. Membership signals information about the content of the quality and ideological validity of the individual, and aided in identifying those who would more likely maintain true Federalist Society principles throughout their legal career. This was especially helpful in the second term of Reagan administration, as they looked for potential judicial nominees and confronted a short supply of ideologically compatible prospects. Ideological drive and shared principles were essential to maintaining the long-term commitments necessary to displace the post-New Deal legal consensus and the institutions that supported legal liberalism. Principles conservative judges and Republican administrations want their officials and judges and clerks.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Does anybody want to make a comment about that slide? So that's quite self-explanatory. No? Okay, basically, I'd just like to end now, and I'm just going to do a summary. Basically, what we went over today was to find out and understand the role of the Federalist Society. We spoke about the significance of why we were studying it. We spoke about what effect the Federalist Society has on constitutional law. We spoke about how the Federalist Society made constitutional change, and also what the purpose of the society, the Federalist Society, is for. So, and then we spoke about the background of the Federalist Society and also the principles with which it brings its doctrines and rhetoric about. So, on that note, if anybody doesn't have any other questions or anything they want to discuss, we'll end the presentation now.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
The question I asked at the beginning, you mentioned that the Federalist Society was brought about to take down or to sort out the executive branch. Can you explain to me how they do that?
Well, they're doing that now. They're doing that by getting the people, by getting their because they obviously want to do legal theories into law. So they have to, by doing that, they have to get their people into the judges, which they have. I think it's 6 judges that they've got in at the moment. And I think how they're going about it is by doing their legal their theories, getting them voted in. Oops, something's happening here.
So what you're saying, Deborah,
getting voted in, and sorry, something's wrong with my system somewhere. Getting them voted in and getting them to accept the laws that they want to put forward. I know that they're executive. I don't know if I've explained it well, Natalie, but I'm going to.
So what you're saying is basically
they are after the executive.
Constantly, can you hear me, Debbie?
And put and implement the laws that they want to change.
Can you hear me, Debbie? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, go on.
So what you're saying, Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Federalist Society, they have their way, get the judges in that they want, which will actually affect the well, sort of kind of like the effect it would have on the executive branch, the president as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Because we do, I think we do know that basically we know the House and the Senate can, when a law is brought in by the executive branch, the president, we know he can do what he likes, or she, but the House and the Senate can veto or override anything the president executive branch puts in. Am I correct in that?
It is, but the Federal Society will make sure they get who they want to get in
the House and the Senate. So you're saying if the House and the Senate is all Conservative, they could just override anything the president says that doesn't agree with the society, basically, the judicial.
Yeah, I think they're going to make sure they're going to get the president who's going to agree with them, and they're going to make sure that they get everybody else in. I mean, I know that they haven't got the Senate vote at the moment, but they will. I can assure you they probably will.
So to take down the executive branch, you're saying they just get in the president that they want. Sympathetic. That's sympathetic to their ideology.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they definitely have to execute. I could tell from when I first read it what they were after, because there they are. They're giving, when we read the first couple of slides, they were able to change, was it saying? Or get them consideration to the court. Where was it? I can't remember which slide it was. We did read about where they were making some constitutional change and giving it to the Supreme Court. So they are able to do that, or they have been doing that. And we've got proof of that already, the fact that they've overwritten. So they're transferring theories into law. So it says here, constitutional theory that could be adopted by justices in Supreme Court opinions, thereby transferring theories into law. So this is what they are doing. So they're developing the intellectual basis for conservative and liberal conservative theory, which could be adopted by justice. So that's what they're trying to do. They're aiming to put their theories into law, so they'll be adopted, and these opinions be adopted by the Supreme Court. So I hope that answers that. That we spoke to that in what the purpose of the Federalist Society are up to. So ending on that note, I hope that answers everything. We are going to go more.
Sorry. I've just having to think about what you just said. Are we saying that the Supreme Court is above the president then? Because the president can, as I said, can veto something in, he can
do. He doesn't have to accept laws either.
You can do an executive order, can't you? Isn't that above the Supreme
Court?
Court?
That's above the Supreme Court. But if they basically need someone in who thinks like them, because the president or she or he can say, I don't agree with this, so
yes,
I'm not vetoing it.
No, that's why they need to get their people in, which is what they've been doing.
Yeah, okay.
The whole idea of them setting it up in the first place, getting their people in, having these seminars, because they want them to have the same
presidents. Let's talk about the president, because I'm talking about executive branch. So we need a president
Who's going to accept their ideas? Yeah.
That is, yeah, that's why Trump was perfect for that.
And which he has done, because they were the ones who put the two nominees forward. I can't remember, I don't know if it was which one was it now?
Three, not two.
Yeah. I can't remember who the justices were, but they were. It was the Federalist Society who put them forward for Trump to accept, and he did.
Yeah, I think, was it Neil Courgette or Amy Barrett?
Yes, it is the lady one.
Who was the other one?
Amy Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah. I think it was that, or it was somebody else. I can't remember. But this is what was happening, yeah. And he did accept them, and it was the Federalist Society's nominees who they put forward, but he did accept them. So.
And it's a good point, I think, because originally we were saying as a movement that the executive wasn't that important. The president themselves isn't that important. As we began to see more of the role of the legislative and the judiciary, and we said it was going to be through legislative courts, we'd always focused on that in great controversy. And then we saw more about the judiciary now because of the Supreme Court. And then in recent months, I think we've recognised the importance of the president. So because if you don't have all three under control, one can override the other two or have massive influence on the other two, I presume. That's why they have to be in, just like the Godhead, they have to be in harmony on their viewpoint, otherwise they don't work together to the end.
And another thing is, if the president, like if we look at Roe v. Wade, President Biden, he didn't want that in, did he? So he didn't veto. Is that what it is? He didn't agree with that. But if the House, say he did agree, say he agreed with something or disagreed with something, sorry, they can take it to the House and Senate, and they, with a 3/3 vote, they can override the president. So you have to have the House and the Senate also agreeing with the others. Sorry.
Well, I thought the president's veto overrode House and Senate, but the reason why presidents don't use it much is because it then just becomes abused.
It does, but also they can't veto Supreme Court decision because it's not really a decision, is it? The Supreme Court rules over that particular case on this Roe v. Wade, and everybody sees that, but the president's hands are tied. What can a president do now? That's not a law. It's not something being brought into law.
It's not a law because they put it to the states. They knew that would happen.
They just made a rule about interpreting law.
They're making the states make that decision, not the federal court themselves. The federal, you know what I mean? If it's gone to the federal decision for the federal court, wouldn't it then been a massive problem? But because they put it to the states, they kind of got away with it loosely. Oh, it's very complicated.
It is British, even with us not being British, wherever you are. I think it was complicated. Go on.
Yes, okay. I've got, because of time, it's nearly 12 now. So I'd like to end the study now. So basically, I just spoke about what we discussed today. This is going to be part 1. There might be part 2 and part 3. There are other slides that we need to go deeper into to help us understand exactly more about the Federalist Society and what they're doing. And so we are going to do that on a part 2 and a part 3 slides. So with that, I'd like to thank for everybody who gave their contribution. I hope this presentation gave everybody food for thought. And I don't know about you, but I sort of got, listening to everybody, it helped me to understand this presentation even more. So I thank those for their input. So on that note, I'm just going to end the slide now, stop sharing. And do I do this? Sorry, stop sharing, sorry. That's it. I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah, so we're going to stop sharing. And if everybody can just kneel before, and I'll just pray to end the Sabbath School study today. So, dear Holy God, we thank you so much for the privilege that we can come before your throne of grace today to present a presentation today on the Federalist Society. We are going to do a part 2 and part 3 of it. And we thank you for those and the contribution that was put in today. We know things that we've discussed. We know that there's a lot more to it and a lot more things that we need to understand. And I know that you'll help us to do that, Lord, as we continue to go through this study and try and learn more about them. So please dismiss us now, Lord. We're going to end our Sabbath School study today. And please bless the rest of our evening and afternoon, I should say. Please bless the up and coming CAP meeting for Elder Perminder as well. We're looking forward to that, and all those that will be attending that. So we give you thanks and praise in and through our beloved Saviour, always to your great honor and glory. Amen.